Okay, now that we have our chat functionality up and running, there's just one more thing to do, and that is to get a list of active users connected to a page. To do that, we'll go back into our socket.js, and I'm going to create a new function here called update user list. And this function will accept the unique room number that we've given to all the chat rooms. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable called get users and set this to io.off the messages namespace, which we have been using on this particular page. And we will query the clients method providing the room number which we are using for partitioning the individual chat rooms or the individual topics of the chat room. And what this will get us is an object which contains a list of all the active users and their user pics that are connected to the room. And where exactly is this data coming from? This data is coming from the fact that when we were joining the room, we did provide the socket with the socket.username and socket.userpic. So that is the data that we can query for every room. Right, so once we have this, we'll just create a new array called user list, set this to a blank, and we will simply loop over the get users object that we have got, and we will simply push an object containing the get users bracket I dot username. So where exactly is this username coming from? This username is coming from this point. Okay, so this is how you have to correctly spell username, just like how we had created the socket wide variable earlier. Comma, user pic comes from get users bracket I dot user pic. So once I have populated this array called user list, what I would do is I would simply emit it back to the room, to the active user who's requesting this data. And we will do that by emitting an event called update users list. And we will send back a stringified version of the user list array. And how exactly are we going to use this function? We will listen for an event called update list. And this event, whenever this event is received in the socket.js, it would contain the room number in the data attribute. So we will simply run this function whenever we hear about this event, and we will simply run this method called update user list, and we will supply the data.room attribute here. Back in the room.html, what we would do is I would simply create a set interval method, and what this will do is this will emit an event called update list, and every time that it does that, it will pass in the room number, the active room number of this particular chat room. And we want to do this at intervals of 15 seconds. So that will be 15,000 milliseconds. Remember that the set interval method accepts only milliseconds. So you can either write it like this, or if you want to make it more readable, you can probably write it like this as well. So once the page emits the update list back to the socket.js, what socket.js will do is it will run the update user list method, and this will get a list of all the active clients connected to this particular chat room, and it will emit back a stringified version of the user list. And when we receive that user list back in the room.html, so let's create the code for that. So we will do a messages.on update user list, and let me just check once. This is users list, so I need to get this exactly right. and I'll run this function which will have the data, and this data essentially is the stringified array which we are sending over the socket. So the first thing to do is to get this data back in a format that we can loop on by doing a json.parse. So json.parse will take the stringified array, will convert it back into an array which we can loop over, and then we have to display this data in the unordered list that we have over here, which goes by the class name of users. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll empty out this unordered list. We'll do that by saying users.html, pass in a blank string, and then we'll simply run a for loop which will loop over the user list array that we have just received over the update user list event. So here we will create a string and we will set this to this part of the HTML. So let's just cut it from here because we don't need it anymore. And I'm going to put it over here. Let's start this with a single quote. And I'm going to go here, close the quotes, and we will replace this with user list bracket n dot user pick, okay, because this is where the URL of the pick goes. Start another single quotes, close them here because here we want the name of the user, and we can get that from user list bracket n dot user plus start single quotes once again and close them here. So once you have the string, we'll take this string and we'll prepend to the users unordered list. Right, so whenever we receive the update user list, update users list event, we're going to extract the data out of that event and we will loop over it, and we will simply insert this into our unordered list on the page. One more thing that we want to do is we want to go back into the socket.js, and whenever a new user joins, we want to run the update user list method, so and forcefully update the user list of all the users connected to that particular room. And we will do that by passing in data.room, and we will also pass in another attribute called true. Okay, and I'm going to make a small change to accommodate for this true. This true means that we have to forcefully update every user's list of active users. Back in the update user list, I'm going to put a comma here, and we will include another argument here called update all. So this is like a question mark asking whether you want to update or not. And the way this will function is we'll say if we do have update all, that is if update all is set to true, if at all this is available, then in addition to doing a socket.to providing a room number dot emit, we will also do a socket.broadcast, okay, which will forcefully update json.stringify, and we will pass in the user list. So this will forcefully update the list of active users for all members connected to a particular chat room. Right, so once we have this, let's restart the app and see where we are at. Alright, so on the left hand side, I'm already logged into ChatCat and I'm logged into a chat room which goes by the name of World Cuisine. And you can see that I'm the only one in this room. On the right hand side, I'm going to log in another user. And we will click on the World Cuisine chat room. And you can see that the moment the second user enters, the second user is listed here. And now we can chat. Right. And when the second user or any one of the user logs out, you will see that the list automatically gets updated, purging the user which has exited. So now that our app is complete, our next step is to deploy it on Heroku.